working on the first four scenarios, I decided to go with the larger one for the fifth, and ended up deciding on Case Blue 1942. So it's larger in a couple different ways. It's larger in terms of the battlefield, the maps, which require some scrolling to see all the different parts of the battlefield. And it's larger in terms of the units, because I tell you what, those Soviet units, they never end. There are tons and tons of them. Anyway, so here's what I've done. Let's hide this panel here so you can get an idea of what part of the battlefield looks like. Right now it's set up in more or less historical starting positions for both sides. And let's get an overview of the entire battlefield. So we'll pop this open, pull that down into here a little bit. Seeing this in the small video probably doesn't do it justice. This overview is sufficient so that when looking at it on your computer, you can actually see each hex, and you can easily tell where the units are deployed. And we can see, for example, that units in Stalingrad, Astrakhan, in various places. The colors are a little bit garish for the Germans and the Soviets, but I ended up going with those to make sure that they showed up against the map background. So anyway, each one of the little squares indicates there is at least one unit in that hex. You can see some of the little squares have black dots in the middle, like there and there, and that means that it is a tank or panzer corps or division. Anyway, so you can pop this overview open anytime you want. You can't actually click and move or play or find the identity of the units or anything, but it just gives a quick look to see what the entire battlefield looks like. So we'll close that up for now. So this game, put this panel back up. So this game starts off with all the units in more or less their historical positions, but allows the players to do different things if they don't want the historical position. So the first thing that has to happen is that the Soviet player can either go with the historical setup, just leave it like it is, or go with free setup, move the units around anywhere they want, any way you want. The system puts no limits on that. In case you decide you actually want to try an entirely different scenario, you could, in theory, set these units up to be the actual battle for Stalingrad or the Soviet winter counteroffensive, whatever you wanted. It really is completely free setup. Or you can just go for a completely random Soviet setup, and it'll just move all those units around. They'll use the same hexes, but you never quite know what you will find in those hexes. So if we were to say free Soviet setup, and we'll just move a couple things just for the heck of it. So we could take this. This is the usual movement data that shows up, except in this case, because it's free, there are no limitations. And I'll take this one and just, I'll move it up here, and I'll take this one and move it down here, and I'll take this one and move it up here. Now, depending on the players and how they feel about it, you might say, well, that's not fair. I don't want the Soviets to have such free setup. You might want to offer constraints and say those Soviet units that are part of the Stavka Reserve or whatever can't move close to the front. System doesn't put any constraints in, though. That's up to the players if they want to do that. Anyway, so you can move as many units as you want, any place that you want to move them for the Soviets, and we will now end the Soviet setup, although we could have kept going as much as we wanted. And that takes us to the point where we can now decide either to have the Axis player retain historical setups or have free Axis setup. And if we take a free Axis setup, it's the same sort of thing. We could do this. We could say, oh, we want these Hungarians, or rather these Romanians up here. again, the system isn't putting any constraints in there, and that's up to the players if they decide, well, we don't want to go too wild and crazy with this. We don't want to put all the German forces down around Rostov and up around Kharkov. Whatever you want to do there. So we could do as many moves as we wanted. We will end the Axis free setup, and that takes us to a quick roll for the weather to see what's going on. Everything is clear and calm right now. The Axis surprise turn begins. And from what I can figure out from Case Blue, the only way to come close to making this work historically is to give the Axis player a surprise turn that involves the usual movement phase and combat phase before we then go into the regular July 1, 1942 turn, which starts with the Axis player turn. So this is movement just like usual. Before we start movement, let's look at some of the things that are going on up here. Because this battlefield is so big, first of all, let's hide that panel. We get a little bit better view here. Because this battlefield is so big, you need to scroll to different places. And of course, you can use the usual browser scroll bars to move around and see things. Or you can use this kind of a compass rose here. You can jump to the middle, where I suspect most of the action will be eventually between Stalingrad and Rostov, or you can scroll diagonally and quickly do that kind of thing. As we saw before, you can take a look at the overview, and it will show you where the units are in any moment and mark the combat motorized corps and divisions for you. Let's see. As in the previous games, we have verbose uncertainty and limited intelligence, and that's up to the players how they want to do it. The verbose is just going to give you a lot more clues and tips that can be quite helpful, but also they can possibly get to be a bit nagging and unwelcome eventually if you've seen those, so you can turn them on or off. Uncertainty, just in case you don't want to know exactly what your unit strengths are, this will possibly change unit strengths a little bit. Every time there's a combat, you can't guarantee that that really is a 1610 Panzer Division. It might be a little bit stronger or a little bit weaker, or maybe it really will be a 1610 Panzer Division. And limited intelligence, which I'm going to turn the limited intelligence off right now. And that means that a player can't see exactly what's going on with opposing units, and depending on the situation, it will see a certain amount of information, but it won't see everything. And we can use these here if we want to hide all the units and just look at the map, or as the Axis player, I want to see my guys, but I want to see what the terrain looks like over there, or I'll go ahead and put these back on the map here. We can look in the dead pile and see what casualties have been taken so far. We won't bother right now. This allows us to look and see if we have accidentally or intentionally put two headquarters in the same hex. We can find out if there are any headquarters on the map that don't have any units assigned to them. This, by the way, only shows for the phasing player gets to see this stuff. He doesn't get to see that for the opposing player. This will find out if there's any place on the map that has an overstack. And here we'll find out if there are any units that haven't attacked yet, but of course we're in the wrong phase, so we can't do that. We can only do that in the combat phase. Any units that haven't moved yet, well, I can tell you there are tons of units that haven't moved yet, so there's no sense in clicking on that right now, but it'll put a dot on the ones that haven't moved. Want to find out where their friendly zones of control. Want to see where are my combat motorized divisions, and the red dots show up. So make those go away. Engineers, in case you want to find out where your engineers are, if you want to see where your own forts are, not enemy forts. And if you want to search for something, Let's just pick something at random. I think there's the 22nd Panzers around someplace. And if we search for that, yep. So here's the 22nd Panzer down here. We'll remove those dots. And the rest of these are for as we start to move. And let's move a couple things just for the heck of it. Not really going to make much sense. If, for example, we take this guy here, we see this movement stuff starts to show up. We see each unit with its designation and its strength, and it's because this is friendly units, of course. We're seeing all this information. For diagnostics, if anybody really wants to look, and mostly this is just for me when I'm working on the game, I can click here and it will tell me everything there is to know about what's going on, so I can see the values of all the variables in there, make sure everything is working correctly. And we can move this guy on down here. Notice that as we move along, it is updating the movement factors that have been expended for each unit. And of course, I can change depending on what kind of a unit it is and what kind of terrain it's moving through. We can check the path for this headquarters and its units as a whole, so it's showing where it came from and how it got here. Of course, if you have moved units from different locations and merged them together into a single headquarters, and you want to check out the path, it would be different for each unit, in which case you could check over here to see the path for an individual unit rather than for this headquarters as a whole. And we could also say we have some combat engineers here. We could go in and do some construction, repair, or demolition. And let's cancel that move, and let's go back here and just take a look at these engineers. So if we do this, it says, now it's not going to allow any construction or repair during the surprise invasion turn, but ordinarily it could start doing things like building a fort, building an airfield. Can also do demolition, so it could damage rail lines, reduce airfield capacity, and that sort of thing. And this is the interface that would allow us to go in and say, okay, we want this unit to do the following construction, repair, demolition work in this hex, but we won't actually do any right now. When we turn to movement, and let's go ahead and move these guys here. I could go back one. I could cancel the move entirely. I could go here. I could end the move. I can do that two different ways. I can click here to end the move, or I can click on the red dot to end the move. In either case, even though I've ended his move for the moment, I could say, oh, you know what, I want to move him some more. Or I could go back and cancel the move, or go back one. I'll say, let's drop him into this hex. So right now we have two headquarters in the hex. And I want to merge all those units into a single headquarters. In order to do that, I could go up here and click the merge button, or there's a keyboard shortcut because you might be mousing around and not want to reach back all the way over to that panel. So if you do a shift click on the unit, the top headquarters, it will merge all the units into a single headquarters there. And in this case, it's giving us a warning that this is going to be an overstack, and that penalty won't be applied immediately. But if we don't resolve that overstack by the end of the movement phase, then the system is going to punish us a little bit for having an overstack. So now all these guys are in one hex. We can redesignate that headquarters if for any reason we want to do that. In order to redesignate, we can click here or here. It'll do exactly the same thing, and it brings up all the headquarters that are available that are not in use. These headquarters are strictly decorative. It doesn't matter what country it is. It doesn't matter if it's an armor symbol or an infantry symbol. It doesn't matter what the number is. It's just to look nice. Of course, it can also be used for camouflage, or you can use it for your own units to help you remember who's under which headquarters just to make it easier to pick stuff out. So in this case, I'm going to call it the first SS core. That doesn't do anything at all. There's no functionality to that. It's just decorative. And let's see. We did some merging. We could add a headquarters here, and we could transfer some units. We'll take that one and move it into here, and we'll take that one and move it into here. So you can do that kind of thing. We can, in those transfers, we're back to having 2 headquarters in the hex. In this case, it's a little bit hard to see that, so we could say spread those out just so we can get a better look at them. Or we can say stack them up. I'll say let's go ahead and let's merge them. This warning is again about the overstack, and we'll in the move right there. So of course I'd be moving all my units, but that's enough for now. So we will end the movement phase. This warning is about that overstack. Not only is it warning us, in this case, because it's the end of the movement phase, and we're still overstacked in that hex. The way I've written the code here is the player doesn't get to decide who is the overstacked unit. The system goes through and randomly picks which units are considered overstacked and thus unable to perform certain tasks. So the player doesn't get to choose. Random choice on which units are going to be affected. So we'll close that. And we are now in the combat phase, the Axis combat phase. And since we were moving around up here, let's go ahead and say we want to attack this hex. Note I've turned off limited intelligence, so we get to see all of the Soviet units that are there. One thing I don't think I pointed out is that in addition to the options for Soviet free setup and Soviet random setup, there are a ton of Soviet non-divisional units. A lot of artillery units, a lot of engineers, anti-tank, anti-aircraft that don't have specific hexes given to them in the scorched earth 1942 scenario order of battle. Nor do I have the resources to find out exactly where those units were placed historically, especially because the scorched earth order of battle doesn't even show unit IDs for them. It just says, for example, 10 artillery units of this strength, whatever. So every time this game is loaded, it takes all of those non-divisional units and randomly distributes them amongst hexes that already have one or more Soviet maneuver units in place. So every time the game starts, those units will end up being somewhere on the map, somewhere in a hex where there was already a Soviet unit, but you don't know where. So every time it will be different. When you're playing with limited intelligence, that can be kind of tricky. In this case, we have full intelligence, so when I put the cursor over here, we can see what's in the hex. We'll go ahead and decide to attack, and then we'll say we want to attack from these 3 hexes. At this point, we have 3 choices. We can calculate the combat, and that probably should really say initiate the combat. Once we click here, there's no going back. This whether the odds are any good or not, that attack has to happen. Or we can say, never mind, let's attack a different hex, and we'll just take all that away. And of course, we can end the phase at any time, but we'll go ahead and do this. So we'll select that. We'll select here, here, and here, and we'll say, let's go ahead and conduct this combat here. We'll give it a click. Because we're not under limited intelligence, it's showing us exactly what's going on with the Soviet defenders in that hex. And if we scroll down, we'll see exactly what's going on with all the Axis attackers. And note, because that one particular Axis hex is overstacked, the system has specified some of these units are not allowed to participate in the combat because they're considered overstacked. So if you tried to get them in. Of course, you can leave out other units if you wanted to leave them out, but I think we'll put them all in. We can also assign defensive air support and offensive air support to this battle. Now, I haven't actually totaled up the air factors that are available, and at the moment it's just set kind of randomly at a maximum of 30 for the Soviets and a maximum of 100 for the Axis. I don't really know if that's accurate or not. I've got to add those up and fix those numbers eventually. But I'm going to take advantage of this little X thing here, which means the system is going to randomly decide how many factors to throw in there. And I could say, oh, let's give it 10, or let's give it all 30. But I'm going to say, here, let the system decide. And over here, so we've got a total of 79 factors going in. And just for the heck of it, I'll say 80 will go in here. And now we're ready to go. We can resolve the combat. We'll give this a click, and this pops up with all the data on exactly, oops, let's reach up here. Pull this down a little bit. Everything that happened in that battle, and ending up with combat result of defender eliminated. All these units are gone. So we could peruse that. We can study that as much as we want. I'm thinking of actually adding kind of a historical record to this, so that it would build up a turn-by-turn, combat-by-combat historical record. So at the end, players would be able to see exactly what happened in the game, almost as if they were reading an historical volume about the campaign. We'll get rid of that. Here's the shorthand for what happened. 7-to-1 odds, rolled a 6, was modified to a 5, because it's a Woods hex, so there was a -1 on it. Combat result, DE. All those guys, all those defenders were eliminated. We'll click here to conduct the advance. So who's going to go in? Well, let's see. Let's put in none of these guys, and we'll go with everybody who's in that hex there with the 2nd Panzer Corps. So we'll conduct the advance. So notice that this got left behind. This one advanced in, and this one was left behind. And why is that? It's because those are all the overstacked units that couldn't participate in the attack, nor can they participate in the advance. Whereas here are the folks who did make it in. So now we could go ahead and continue with all the combats that we wanted to do any place else on the line. Up and down the line, we could do all the attacks necessary. We can run down here and attack around Rostov. But let's just say we're going to end that phase. So that's the end of the surprise turn. And now we come up to the regular game turn 1. And it's the Axis player turn again. And now he'll get to do the full deal, which I'll just run through. So we've got the initial phase, the supply phase, movement phase, combat, exploitation, when we'll end that. And that takes us now to the Soviet turn, and they'll have all the same choices. So that's what I'm doing now with my Blue 42 scenario. Still have some work to do on it. For example, those air strengths, I haven't figured those out yet. I haven't yet added in the reinforcement schedule per the order of appearance starting in July 1, 1942. And I have a couple of Fire in the East, Scorched Earth specific rules that I need to take care of. For example, railroad regaging. I didn't need to do that in any of the previous scenarios, but I've got to do it here. So I haven't written any rules for that. At the moment, Germans don't need to regauge any rail lines, and I'll have to write that rule in here, write some code for that. So there you have it. That's what's happening with my Blue 42 scenario.